What happens when a fairy tale marriage reveals a hidden nightmare? In the polished world of high society glamour, tech billionaire Charles Thorne and his beautiful pregnant wife Lillian were the ultimate power couple. But behind the dazzling smiles and charity galas, a devastating secret was festering. When their divorce hearing began, the city held its breath. The doors of the courthouse swung open, not for a lawyer, but for Charles's mistress Serafina, dressed in a shocking white gown, ready to claim her victory. But no one, not even her, could have predicted the bombshell about to detonate a single piece of paper in the hands of Lillian's lawyer that would prove everyone was wrong about who the real wife truly was. The world knew them as the Thornes, Charles and Lillian. He the charismatic architect of a tech empire that had reshaped modern communication. She the graceful, intelligent daughter of the Hart dynasty, a family whose name was etched onto the cornerstones of half the city's museums and libraries. Their union wasn't just a marriage. It was an alliance, a merger of New World innovation and Old World prestige. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece. They resided in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, a palace of glass and steel where the sunsets bled across Italian marble floors. Their parties were legendary, attended by a constellation of artists, politicians, and financiers, all orbiting the gravitational pull of their perfect hosts. Charles, with his easy laugh and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of ambition, would have a hand on the small of Lillian's back, whispering something that would make her smile a genuine, radiant smile that could launch 1,000 magazine covers. And it did. Lillian, or Lily as he called her in their private moments, had loved him with a fierce, all-consuming passion. She saw past the billionaire bravado to the man beneath, the one who'd grown up with nothing, who'd built his company, Elysian Systems, from a garage with sheer force of will. She admired his drive, his relentless energy. He, in turn, seemed to adore her quiet strength, her sharp mind, and the calming elegance that soothed his restless soul. For 5 years, their life was this beautiful, seamless narrative. Then the first hairline crack appeared. It was almost imperceptible. A text message glimpsed at an odd angle, a name, Serafina, that flashed for a second before the phone was angled away. When Lily asked, Charles's explanation was smooth as silk. A new hire in marketing, very aggressive, a bit of a pest. He'd chuckled, dismissing it. Don't you worry about a thing. But the cracks began to multiply. The late nights at the office became more frequent, the excuses more elaborate. There were sudden business trips to cities where Elysian had no business. The scent of a perfume that wasn't hers lingered on his suits, a floral exotic fragrance that seemed to mock her own classic Chanel No. 5. The intimacy, once the bedrock of their marriage, became stilted, then scarce. Charles was a ghost in their own home, his body present but his mind clearly elsewhere. Lily, pregnant with their first child, initially blamed herself. The hormones, the morning sickness, the exhaustion perhaps. She was the one who had changed. She tried harder. She planned romantic dinners he canceled at the last minute. She bought new lingerie that went unnoticed. She suggested a baby moon, a final trip for just the two of them, but he was always swamped, always on the verge of a breakthrough deal. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Lily had a routine ultrasound appointment. Lying on the crinkly paper of the examination table, she watched the grainy black and white image of their son, a tiny, perfect being with a furiously beating heart. A wave of profound protective love washed over her, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She sent the picture to Charles, her text bubbling with emotion. "He's perfect, my love. I can't wait for you to meet him." Hours passed. No reply. That evening he came home late, smelling of wine and that alien perfume. He glanced at the ultrasound photo she'd left on his nightstand. "That's great, Lily. Really great," he said, his voice distracted as he loosened his tie. He didn't ask about the heartbeat. He didn't ask how she was feeling. That night, Lily didn't sleep. She felt the cold dread solidify in her stomach. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a demolition. While Charles slept, his phone for once lay unlocked on his bedside table. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She told herself not to. She told herself to trust him to be the bigger person. But a bigger part of her, the part that was a mother protecting her child's future, needed to know the truth. The messages were all there, a brutal, undeniable archive of betrayal. Hundreds of them to Serafina. They weren't just salacious texts. They were a chronicle of a parallel life. "I miss your taste," one read. "Last night was incredible," said another. There were photos of them at intimate dinners on a boat in a hotel room that looked suspiciously like the one from his business trip to Miami. They spoke of a future together, of when he would be free. The most devastating message was from that very day. While Lily was looking at the miracle of their son, Charles had been with her. Serafina had written, "She sent you the baby picture, didn't she? Don't let her trap you, my love. Remember what we're fighting for. Our beginning." Charles's reply, sent just an hour before he walked into their home, shattered the last vestige of Lily's world. "There is no trap, only an obstacle. It's you and me, always." The screen blurred through Lily's tears. The gilded cage had burst open, revealing not freedom, but a barren, desolate wasteland. The man she loved didn't exist. He was a fiction. And she, Lillian Hart Thorne, was not his cherished wife, but an obstacle. She placed the phone back on the nightstand, her movements eerily calm. The fight-or-flight instinct had been replaced by a chilling clarity. The love had died, and in its place something cold and hard was beginning to form. She was no longer just a wife. She was a mother, and she would be damned if she let this man and his mistress destroy her son's life before it had even begun. The war had been declared, and she hadn't even known she was on the battlefield. Until now. The morning after was silent and heavy, the air thick with unspoken truths. Lily watched Charles move through their morning routine, the sharp suit, the expensive watch, the practiced smile in the mirror, and felt like she was watching a stranger. The man who had shared her bed and her dreams was a phantom. In his place stood a performer, an expert actor in the theater of their marriage. She waited until he had his briefcase in hand, his keys jingling with an air of finality. "Charles," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the hysteria he likely expected. He turned a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at the delay. "Lily, I'm late. We need to talk about Serafina Dubois." The name hung in the air between them. For a fraction of a second, Charles's mask of composure slipped. Raw panic flashed in his eyes before being instantly suppressed, replaced by a look of weary condescension. "Oh, for God's sake, Lily. Are we back to this? I told you she's an employee. An employee you took to Miami. An employee you promise a future with. An employee you discuss your unborn child with as an obstacle." Each question was a precision strike, and with each one the color drained from Charles's face. He put his briefcase down. The gaslighting began. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He accused her of violating his privacy, of being paranoid and hormonal. "You're pregnant, Lily. You're not thinking clearly," he exclaimed, his voice laced with false concern. He tried to touch her, to pull her into an embrace, but she recoiled as if from a snake. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare touch me." Seeing that feigned sympathy wouldn't work, he switched tactics. He confessed, but only partially. He minimized everything. "Yes, I slept with her," he admitted, framing it as a terrible mistake. "It was meaningless, a stupid, pathetic lapse in judgment. It's over. I ended it. It means nothing compared to you, to us, to this family." He begged for forgiveness, his words a torrent of practiced remorse. He swore he would fire Serafina, that he would do anything to make it right. He painted a picture of a man who had strayed but was desperate to come home. It was a compelling performance, one that might have worked on the woman she had been yesterday. But the Lily who had read those messages knew better. She knew the affair wasn't over. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. "I want a divorce, Charles. She said the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. His demeanor changed instantly. The remorse vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. A divorce. Are you insane? Do you have any idea what that would do to the company? To our reputation? There's a child involved, Lillian. He weaponized their son, the very child he had dismissed as an obstacle. The argument escalated into the ugliest fight of their lives. He threatened to ruin her, to paint her as an unstable gold digger. He swore she wouldn't get a cent more than the prenuptial agreement stipulated, an agreement she'd signed without a second thought, blinded by love. That evening, Lily left the penthouse and went to her father's home. Arthur Hart, a man who moved with the quiet authority of old money and an even older sense of honor, listened to his daughter's story without interruption. When she was finished, his face was like granite. He didn't say, "I told you so," though he had never fully trusted Charles's slick charm. He simply said, "He has underestimated you, Lillian, and he has underestimated this family. We will not be obstacles. We will be a tidal wave." The next day, Arthur Hart made a call. He hired Alistair Finch, a lawyer known less for his flashy courtroom theatrics and more for his reputation as a shark who swam in the deepest, murkiest corporate waters. Finch was a man who didn't just fight cases. He dismantled them piece by painstaking piece until his opponent's foundation crumbled to dust. Meanwhile, Charles's promises to end the affair were revealed as the lies they were. He didn't fire Serafina. Instead, the affair became more brazen. It was as if Lily's discovery had liberated them. Serafina Dubois was no longer a secret. She was a statement. She was a striking woman with raven hair, sharp features, and an ambition that burned as brightly as Charles's. She began appearing at industry events, not on Charles's arm, but close by, always in his orbit. The whispers in their social circle grew into a roar. Then came the accidental encounter. Lily was at a small exclusive boutique picking up a custom-made bassinet, a gift from her mother. As she was finalizing the payment, a voice behind her, smooth and cloying, said, "What a beautiful choice. For a boy or a girl?" Lily turned to find Serafina standing there, impeccably dressed, a predatory smile on her face. It was no accident. "I'm sorry, have we met?" Lily asked, her voice ice. "I don't believe we have officially. I'm Serafina Dubois. I work with Charles." She said his name with a casual intimacy that was designed to wound. "He speaks of you." "I'm sure he does," Lily replied, signing the receipt and turning to leave. But Serafina stepped into her path. "He's a wonderful man," she continued, her eyes dropping to Lily's swollen abdomen. "So full of life. He deserves to be happy, don't you think? Truly happy, unburdened." The implication was clear. You and your child are his burden. Lily looked Serafina dead in the eye. "A man's character isn't defined by his pursuit of happiness, Ms. Dubois. It's defined by his honor, something you and he seem to know very little about." Without waiting for a reply, Lily walked out, her heart pounding. The confrontation solidified her resolve. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. It was about protecting her child from the toxic legacy of these two people. The divorce proceedings began. Charles's lawyers came in with a lowball offer, strictly adhering to the prenup, arguing that Charles's wealth had been created before the marriage, and Lily was entitled to very little. They wanted a quick, quiet dissolution. They leaked stories to the press painting Lily as vindictive and greedy, trying to use her pregnancy to extort a fortune from a man who had made a simple mistake. But Alistair Finch was unfazed. He didn't counteroffer. He didn't engage in the media slinging match. He simply started digging. "Men like Charles Thorne don't just build empires," he told Lily in his mahogany-paneled office. "They build them on foundations. We need to inspect those foundations for cracks." Finch filed for a full financial disclosure, a forensic accounting of every dollar Charles had ever earned, moved, or hidden. Charles's legal team fought it, claiming it was an overreach and invasion of privacy. The battle escalated until a court hearing was set to determine the scope of the discovery. This was the hearing that Charles and Serafina thought would be a simple procedural matter, a chance to put the greedy pregnant wife in her place. It was this hearing that Seraphina decided to attend a power play of epic proportions. She would show the world who the future Mrs. Thorne was. She planned her outfit with the precision of a general planning an invasion. It would be white, pure bridal and utterly defiant. She was no longer the mistress in the shadows. She was the woman who had won. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a brutal war of attrition fought through legal filings and public opinion. Charles's PR machine went into overdrive. Sympathetic articles appeared in business journals praising his genius and lamenting the personal distractions he was facing. Anonymous sources told gossip columns that Lillian had always been cold and demanding, and that Charles had been unhappy for years. They were trying to write a new history, one where he was the victim and she the villain. Lily, on Alistair Finch's advice, remained silent. Her silence was a stark contrast to the noise Charles and Seraphina were making, and it unnerved them. It was the quiet of a storm gathering strength just over the horizon. While they were busy with public perception, Finch was immersed in a different kind of warfare. He and his team of forensic accountants were sifting through mountains of preliminary documents following the labyrinthine trails of shell corporations' offshore accounts and complex investments that constituted the Thorne empire. "He's a magician," Finch told Lily during one of their meetings, pointing to a complex flowchart on his wall. "He makes money appear over here, disappear over there. A master of misdirection. But every magic trick has a secret. A hidden lever, a trapdoor. We just need to find it." Finch was particularly interested in Charles's life before he met Lily. Charles's official story was a classic rags-to-riches tale, a brilliant kid from a working-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, who coded his way to the top. He had no family to speak of, an estranged mother and a father who had passed away years ago. His past was a blank slate, which had once seemed romantic to Lily, a man entirely of his own making. Now it seemed suspicious. "No one's past is a blank slate, Ms. Hart," Finch said, his eyes glinting. "It's just an unread book, and I intend to read every single page." He dispatched private investigators, discreet, thorough professionals, to Phoenix. Their instructions were simple: reconstruct Charles Thorne's life from age 18 to the day he arrived in New York. Talk to old neighbors, high school friends, former colleagues at his first startup. Leave no stone unturned. While Finch hunted for ghosts in Arizona, Charles's arrogance grew. Convinced that Lily's silence was a sign of weakness and that his prenup was ironclad, he became bolder in his relationship with Seraphina. They were photographed together at a gala, not touching, but with a palpable energy between them that screamed intimacy. It was a calculated move designed to humiliate Lily and force her into accepting his meager settlement offer. Seraphina, for her part, was relishing her new role. She moved into a lavish apartment paid for by Charles and began to behave as if she were already the lady of the manor. She was positioning herself not just as Charles's partner, but as the future steward of his legacy. She saw Lily not as a person, but as a temporary nuisance, a loose end that needed to be tidied up before her real life could begin. The day before the hearing, Charles's lawyer, a notoriously aggressive litigator named Marcus Black, sent over their final pre-hearing brief. It was a vicious document. It suggested that Lily's pregnancy might have been a calculated effort to secure a financial position, and questioned her stability. It was designed to provoke, to make Lily so angry and emotional that she would be flustered in court. Lily read it, her hands shaking not with fear, but with a righteous fury. "He wants to play dirty," she said to Finch over the phone, her voice tight. "He wants to drag my son into this." "Let him," Finch replied calmly. "Mr. Black is a bulldog, but bulldogs are short-sighted. They charge straight ahead, focused only on the target in front of them. They never see the trap closing in from the side." There was something in Finch's tone, a quiet confidence, a hint of a hidden ace that calmed her. She didn't know what he had found, or if he had found anything at all, but she trusted him. She had to. The night before the court date, Lily couldn't sleep. She sat in the nursery her mother had helped her set up in the Hart mansion, a serene room of soft blues and creams. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the crib, feeling her son kick within her. This was her reality. This was her purpose. The noise, the lies, the betrayal. It all faded away in the quiet promise of this room. She wasn't fighting for a share of an empire she no longer wanted. She was fighting for a peaceful future, for the innocent life she was carrying. The morning of the hearing, Lily chose her outfit with the same care Serafina had chosen hers, but with the opposite intent. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue maternity dress. It was professional, dignified, and unapologetically maternal. It spoke not of defiance, but of quiet strength. She wore her grandmother's pearls, a symbol of the Hart legacy, a legacy of integrity and resilience. She was not the hysterical, greedy woman they portrayed. She was Lillian Hart, and she was ready. As she walked towards the courthouse, flanked by her father and Alistair Finch, she was met by a barrage of camera flashes and shouted questions. She kept her eyes forward, her expression serene. She was the picture of grace under fire. Inside the courtroom was a sterile, imposing space of dark wood and fluorescent lighting. Charles was already there, sitting beside Marcus Black. He looked tense, his jaw clenched. He refused to meet her eyes. The stage was set. The players were in their places. All that was missing was the final dramatic entrance. And right on cue, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. The moment the courtroom doors opened, a collective silent gasp rippled through the gallery. It wasn't a lawyer or a clerk who entered, but Serafina Dubois. She was a vision in white. Not a simple white dress, but a structured architectural gown that looked more suited for a wedding aisle than a legal proceeding. It was a bold, audacious statement. Her dark hair was slicked back. Her makeup was flawless, and a small, triumphant smile played on her lips. She walked with the unhurried grace of a predator who knows the hunt is over. She ignored the stares and the whispers, her eyes fixed on Charles. She chose a seat in the front row of the public gallery directly behind him, a silent, stunning declaration of her place in his life. Lily felt a pang not of jealousy, but of a profound, weary sadness. She looked at Charles, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a flush creeping up his neck. This circus was of his making. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Harriet Morales, looked over her spectacles at Serafina, her expression one of deep disapproval at the theatrical display, but she said nothing. "Mr. Black, you may begin." Marcus Black rose, his presence filling the room. He launched into a speech that was both eloquent and brutal. He painted Charles Thorne as a visionary, a man of immense public importance whose work was being jeopardized by a meritless and vindictive claim. He referenced the prenuptial agreement, holding it up as a sacred binding contract between two consenting adults. "Ms. Hart entered this marriage with her eyes wide open," Black boomed. "She enjoyed the fruits of Mr. Thorne's success, and now upon its dissolution she seeks to cripple the very engine of that success out of spite. Her demands for a forensic audit of Mr. Thorne's entire financial history are nothing more than a fishing expedition, a desperate attempt to leverage her pregnancy for a payout far beyond what was agreed upon." He spoke of Lily's instability, her refusal to accept a generous settlement, and her attempts to damage Mr. Thorne's public standing. It was a masterfully constructed narrative of the reasonable billionaire and his unreasonable emotional wife. When he sat down, the air was thick with his accusations. Serafina looked smug. Charles looked relieved. "Mr. Finch," Judge Morales said, her tone flat, "your response." Alistair Finch rose slowly. He was the complete opposite of Marcus Black. Where Black was a bulldog, Finch was a quiet, silver-haired crane, patient and watchful. He approached the lectern not with aggression, but with a weary solemnity. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and clear. "Mr. Black has painted a compelling picture of a contract, of agreements, of two adults making a decision. And in principle we agree. Contracts are important. They are the bedrock of our society. The promises we make to one another matter." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. He turned his gaze from the judge to Charles. "Which is why we must ensure we are talking about the correct contract. The foundational contract." Marcus Black scoffed. "The foundational contract is the prenuptial agreement, Mr. Finch. It's quite clear." "Is it?" Finch replied softly. He then addressed Charles directly. Mr. Thorne, you and my client Ms. Hart were married on October 12, 2020, in a ceremony in the Hamptons. Is that correct? Charles, forced to speak, cleared his throat. Yes, that is correct. And before that day, you presented yourself as an unmarried man, free to enter into the contract of matrimony. Is that also correct? Yes, of course, Charles said, his annoyance growing. Where is this going? Patience, Mr. Thorne, Finch said. He walked back to his table and picked up a simple, unassuming folder. Mr. Black calls our request for a full financial disclosure a fishing expedition. But sometimes when you fish in murky waters, you don't just find financial irregularities. Sometimes you find the truth. He opened the folder. The room was silent. Lily leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could see Serafina craning her neck, her perfect smile faltering slightly with confusion. Mr. Thorne, Finch continued, his voice resonating with a newfound gravity. You grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, a city you left behind to seek your fortune. But the past, as they say, has a long memory. My investigators spoke to dozens of people from your former life, neighbors, old friends. They also pulled public records. Marriage licenses, for instance, are public records. Charles went rigid. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy pale sheen. Marcus Black shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. Counsel is trying to introduce unsubstantiated gossip. It is far from unsubstantiated, Mr. Black, Finch said, pulling a single document from the folder. It was a photocopy, slightly faded, of a certificate. And it is the single most relevant fact in this entire proceeding. He placed the document on the overhead projector. The image flickered to life on the screen for the entire courtroom to see. It was a certificate of marriage. The names on the certificate were not Charles Thorne and Lillian Hart. The names were Charles Thorne and Clara Reed. The date of the marriage was June 12, 2018. Over 2 years before he married Lily. The location was a small, unassuming courthouse in Clark County, Nevada. Finch let the image sink in. A wave of shock washed over the courtroom. Reporters in the back were scrambling, their fingers flying across their phones. Marcus Black stared at the screen, his mouth agape. Serafina's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The white dress, once a symbol of victory, now looked like a costume for a fool. Clara Reed, Finch announced to the stunned room, a high school sweetheart from Phoenix. A woman Mr. Thorne married in a quick Las Vegas ceremony after selling his first piece of software. A woman he left behind when he moved to New York to build his empire. And most importantly, Your Honor, a woman from whom he never ever legally divorced. Finch turned to face Charles, whose entire world was collapsing in real time. The foundational contract, Mr. Thorne, is not your prenup with my client. It is your marriage certificate to Clara Reed, a contract that remains legally valid to this day. He let the implication land a thunderclap in the silent room. Which means, Your Honor, he concluded, his voice ringing with absolute clarity, that the marriage between Charles Thorne and my client Lillian Hart is legally void. He committed bigamy. Everything that followed the vows, the prenup, this entire life he built with Ms. Hart is predicated on a criminal act of fraud. My client is not a divorcing wife fighting for a settlement. She is the victim of a massive multi-year deception, and we are no longer here to discuss discovery. We are here to discuss restitution for the damages caused by that crime. The hidden marriage certificate wasn't about another affair. It was about the affair. The entire marriage to Lillian had been the affair. Clara Reed, the forgotten girl from Phoenix, was and had always been his legal wife. Lily was in the cold, hard eyes of the law the other woman. And Serafina was nothing at all. She was the mistress of a man who was illegally pretending to be married to another woman. The gavel slammed down as Judge Morales called for order, but it was too late. The bomb had gone off and the fallout was just beginning. The moment Alistair Finch's final words landed, the courtroom didn't just erupt, it fractured. The sound was a physical force, a concussive wave of shock that slammed into Lily. It was a roar composed of 100 individual noises, the frantic percussive clicking of camera shutters, the overlapping shouts of reporters, the sharp incredulous gasps from the gallery, and the heavy impotent slam of Judge Morales's gavel, which was utterly consumed by the chaos. From the maelstrom's eye, Lily watched the scene unfold in a series of surreal slow-motion vignettes. She saw Marcus Black, a man renowned for his aggressive composure, physically stagger back as if he'd been struck. His mouth was agape, his face a mask of disbelief and professional horror as he stared not at the judge or the evidence, but at his own client, the man whose lies had just detonated his entire case. Her gaze then shifted to Charles. He was no longer the charismatic titan, the master of the universe. He was a statue carved from ice, utterly still and silent. His face, which she had once loved and studied for hours, was a blank canvas of ruin. The confident spark in his eyes was extinguished, leaving behind two dark, unseeing voids. It was the terrifying emptiness of a man who had just witnessed his own soul being publicly executed. His entire identity, billionaire visionary husband, had been revealed as a cheap forgery, and the shock had hollowed him out from the inside. But it was the sight of Seraphina that burned itself into Lily's memory. The woman in white who had entered with the triumphant poise of a queen at her coronation was crumbling. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly translucent white that clashed horribly with the pure, arrogant white of her dress. The gown, once a symbol of victory, now looked like a fool's costume, a bridal gown for a wedding that was not only cancelled, but had been a criminal fraud from its inception. Her hands trembled. Her predatory smile was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed horror of someone who realizes they are the punchline to a devastating joke. Her ambition, so fierce and all-consuming, had led her to this public humiliation on a scale she could never have imagined. With a strangled cry that was swallowed by the din, Seraphina turned and fled, a desperate hunted creature pursued from the room by a relentless pack of journalists who smelled blood. A firm, steadying hand touched Lily's elbow. Alistair Finch. On her other side, her father, Arthur Hart, materialized, his body a solid, immovable wall between her and the chaos. "Lillian, we're leaving now." Arthur said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that cut through the noise. The walk from the council table to the courtroom doors was a journey through a war zone. Camera flashes exploded like strobing landmines, momentarily blinding her. Questions were hurled like shrapnel. "Ms. Hart, did you know? Lily, how do you feel? Was it all a lie?" She kept her eyes fixed on the back of her father's head, focusing on his strength, using it as her own. Each step was a monumental effort. The heavy doors of the car closed and the chaos was instantly sealed away. The sudden profound silence was as shocking as the noise had been. The black leather interior felt like a decompression chamber, a silent void between a world that had just ended and a future she couldn't begin to fathom. The car glided silently into traffic, the city outside a blur of muted color and light. For a long moment no one spoke. Lily stared at her hands clasped tightly in her lap over the swell of her unborn child. Finally she let out a shuddering breath and spoke, her voice a fragile, cracked whisper. "So, it was all... none of it was real." Alistair Finch turned slightly in his front passenger seat. His expression was no longer that of a warrior, but of a gentle guardian. "The life you lived was real to you, Lillian," he said softly. "The deception was his alone. But in the eyes of the law, no, the marriage was never valid. Bigamy," she whispered the word, tasting its ugliness. "Fraud." They were abstract legal terms that failed to capture the profound personal violation. "The district attorney's office has already been alerted." Finch continued, his tone becoming more businesslike, perhaps to give her a framework of facts to hold on to. "There will be criminal charges. I have already filed motions to have all his personal and corporate assets frozen pending the criminal investigation and the civil suits that will follow. He will not be able to move a single dollar. Lily nodded numbly, processing the information. Then another thought surfaced, a question about the woman whose name was now inextricably linked to hers. "And Clara Reed?" she asked. The real Mrs. Thorne. "My investigators located her last week," Finch explained. "She's a second-grade teacher in a suburb of Phoenix. According to her, Charles married her in Vegas right after he sold his first major piece of code. He moved to New York to get his big break, promising to send for her. He sent a little money for a few months, and then he went dark. She was 22 years old, heartbroken, and had no money or resources to track down a husband who had vanished. She simply believed he had abandoned her. She never knew what he became." A wave of strange, unexpected emotion washed over Lily. It wasn't jealousy or anger. It was a profound, aching sorrow for this unknown woman. A schoolteacher, a life of quiet dignity shattered by the same casual cruelty that had just upended her own. Charles hadn't just deceived Lily. He had discarded Clara like a piece of trash on his climb to the top. By law, Finch concluded the final nail in Charles's coffin, Ms. Reed is entitled to a significant portion of the wealth he accumulated during their legal marriage, which for all intents and purposes is the entire Elysian Systems empire. The staggering irony landed with the force of a physical blow. Charles, in his greedy, desperate attempt to deny Lily her rightful share, had inadvertently ensured he would lose everything to the wife he had tried to erase from existence. The following days at the Hart estate passed in a heavy fog. The grand, quiet house became her sanctuary from the storm raging outside. The story was everywhere, a media supernova. She saw her own face on television, her name in bold headlines. The narrative had shifted completely. She was no longer the greedy, vindictive wife, but St. Lillian, the dignified, pregnant victim. The outpouring of public sympathy was immense, but it felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. It brought no comfort. How could it, when the very foundation of her adult life had been revealed as quicksand? She would wander the silent halls, her hand resting on her stomach, the steady rhythmic kicks of her son, the only thing that felt real. She would pass a photograph from her wedding day, her and Charles smiling, luminous with a love she had believed was real, and feel a dizzying wave of vertigo. Every memory was now tainted, every shared laugh, a lie, every whispered, "I love you," a line in his long-running performance. One evening her father found her in the nursery, standing before the window and staring out at the manicured gardens veiled in twilight. She hadn't been crying, but her face was etched with a grief so deep it seemed to have settled in her bones. "He never loved me," she said, her voice flat, stating it as a simple, devastating fact. "It was all a performance. My name, my family's connections, my legitimacy. That's what he married. That's all it ever was." Arthur Hart didn't offer empty platitudes. He stood beside her, following her gaze into the gathering darkness. "Yes," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "He wanted all of that. But it's more than that, Lillian. He wanted your grace. He wanted your light. Men like Charles Thorne are fundamentally hollow. They are black holes of ambition with nothing at their core. He saw your substance, your integrity, the very things he lacked, and he tried to absorb them, to wear them like a costume, to convince the world and perhaps even himself that he was whole." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a fierce paternal love. "Do not let his emptiness become yours. Do not let his crime define the story of your life. He built an empire on lies. The Hart family built its name on centuries of honor. That is the legacy that flows through your veins." He gently placed a hand on her swollen abdomen. "And this," he said, his voice softening with emotion, "this child you carry is not part of his lie. He is not a consequence of the fraud. He is your truth. The one pure, real, and good thing to come from all of this. He is a Hart, and he will have a life of honor and integrity because you, his mother, will give that to him." The words landed not as comfort, but as a call to arms. They sliced through the fog of her grief and ignited something within her. Her father was right. Her story wasn't over. Charles had written a chapter of deceit, but she would write the rest of the book. The tears that finally came were not tears of a broken victim, but hot tears of release of a profound and painful catharsis. She was not the tragic Mrs. Thorne. She was Lillian Hart, and she was about to become a mother. The story of her fraudulent marriage was over. The story of her life and her son's was just beginning. The seasons turned over the city, washing the grit and glamour of one drama away to make room for the next. The Thorne scandal. Once a roaring inferno that consumed headlines and conversations, cooled to embers, then to ash. The name that had once signified power and innovation became a whispered cautionary tale, a footnote in the city's relentless narrative of ambition and ruin. In the quiet passage of that year, the lives shattered by the blast of Alistair Finch's revelation settled into new, unforeseen landscapes. Charles Thorne, the fallen titan, traded his bespoke suits for prison-issue gray. His world of glass-walled boardrooms and panoramic penthouse views shrank to the suffocating dimensions of a concrete cell. He was a ghost in the financial pages, his name invoked only in SEC filings and legal precedents. The plea bargain spared him a longer sentence, but it could not spare him from the ordeal. Heart that was for a man like him a punishment worse than incarceration. He was stripped not just of his wealth, but of the one thing he truly worshipped, his own myth. Seraphina Dubois, the woman in white, had vanished, as if she were a mirage all along. After her spectacular flight from the courtroom, she had been swallowed by the silence she once so feared. There were no social media posts, no vengeful tell-alls, no defiant appearances. The world she fought with such ferocity to conquer had erased her without a trace. It was rumored she had returned to Europe. Her name changed her ambition, cauterized by the public humiliation of having been the mistress to a fraud. And Clara Reed, the schoolteacher from Phoenix, the true and forgotten. Mrs. Thorne handled her monumental windfall with a grace that was the ultimate rebuke to Charles's entire existence. She did not buy yachts or penthouses. Instead, she established the Reed Foundation for Arizona's future, pouring her newfound wealth into scholarships for underprivileged students and funding for under-resourced schools. She remained in her modest home, a woman of quiet, profound substance who, by simply being herself, demonstrated a character Charles Thorne could never comprehend, let alone possess. For Lillian Hart, that first year was one of deliberate, quiet reconstruction. The initial aftermath of the trial was suffocating. She became a public symbol, the dignified victim, the wronged woman. The pity in people's eyes felt like another kind of cage. So she withdrew. She retreated into the sanctuary of her family, and with methodical purpose began to dismantle the last remnants of her old life. The true turning point came not in a courtroom or a lawyer's office, but in the sterile, quiet room of a hospital. The birth of her son Nicholas was a primal, world-altering event. The moment the nurse placed him in her arms, a warm, wailing, perfect bundle of life, the last ghosts of the past were exorcised. Holding him, she understood. This tiny being was not the product of a lie or a scandal. He was the beginning of a truth, her truth. She named him Nicholas Hart. There would be no hyphen, no shadow of the man who was a biological footnote to his existence. He was a heart rooted in a legacy of integrity, and his story would be his own. She left her father's grand mansion, seeking a space that was hers alone. She found it in a sun-drenched brownstone on a tree-lined street, a home with a small garden out back, and rooms that felt human-scaled and warm. The sterile, performative grandeur of the penthouse felt like a lifetime away. The process of making the brownstone a home became her therapy. She painted walls, chose furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive, and created a nursery filled not with designer objects but with love and light. Every choice was an act of reclamation. As Nicholas grew, so did Lily's new purpose. Letters and emails began to arrive, forwarded by Alistair Finch's office. They were from other women. Women who had seen her story in the news. Their circumstances were different. Some had lost their savings to a fraudulent partner, others their homes, others years of their lives to elaborate deceptions. But the pain was the same. In their stories, Lily saw the universal echo of her own. She realized her ordeal, as public and spectacular as it was, had given her a unique platform. She met with Alistair Finch not as a client but as a peer. Together they laid the groundwork for the Hart Foundation for Truth in Partnership. Its mission was simple and clear: to provide top-tier legal aid and psychological support for victims of domestic and marital fraud. She was no longer just a survivor. She was becoming a champion. One brilliant autumn afternoon, a full year after her world had been detonated and rebuilt, Lily was in the park. The air was crisp, smelling of earth and drying leaves. Nicholas, now a toddler with a determined wobbly walk, was chasing pigeons on the grass. His laughter a bright musical sound that was the center of her universe. She was sitting on a bench, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, a sense of profound, settled peace in her heart. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A news alert. She glanced at it, her thumb hovering over the screen out of habit. The headline was stark: former Elysian CEO Charles Thorne granted early release. For a single cold second, muscle memory took over. A ghost of the old fear, a tightening in her chest. Her breath caught. The man who had built her world and then shattered it was going to be free. The name on the screen felt like a brand. But then she looked up. She saw her son Nicholas, who had just plopped down onto the grass, his face a perfect picture of delight. He looked over at her and beamed, holding up a fallen red leaf as if it were a priceless treasure. And in that instant the spell was broken. The man in the headline was no longer a monster, no longer a source of pain, no longer a part of her. He was just a name on a screen. A character in a story she had already finished, a book she had closed and put away on a high shelf. He had no power here in this sunlit park, in this real and beautiful life she had built. The fear vanished, replaced by a calm, absolute certainty. She slipped the phone back into her pocket without a second thought, the news already forgotten. She walked onto the grass, and as Nicholas ran into her arms, she lifted him high, burying her face in the soft warmth of his neck. His weight was a solid, reassuring anchor. His giggle was the only sound that mattered. The gilded cage had been a fantasy built on lies. This simple, profound moment of love and peace was a true home built on a foundation that could never be broken. Lillian's story is a powerful reminder that the most devastating betrayals often come from those we trust the most. She walked into that courtroom, a pregnant wife, believing she was fighting for a fair divorce, only to learn her entire life was a lie. But her story didn't end with Charles's deception. It began anew with her own strength. She teaches us that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about resilience, integrity, and the courage to rebuild on a foundation of truth. What would you have done in Lillian's place? How does a person recover when they find out their reality is a fraud? We all face our own battles, and stories like this remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit. If this story of betrayal, justice, and ultimate triumph moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who appreciates a powerful real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.